somewhere in Dreamland.
It looked like the complexion of a dead person in a casket.
Random memories of waking up in the night, knowing I'm not alone in the room.
We have 3 cities that all claim to be the UFO capital of the entire world.
So when she turned on the kitchen light, it stopped walking.
My parents told me these things didn't exist.
They're a little more ominous, creepy, scary, and the question is there, what is this thing?
Hovering just inches from the window was literally is what you'd imagine a grave to be.
Never seen anything like this in my life.
I'm still left with more questions than answers.
Welcome back, dreamers. If you've had an encounter, please contact me at somedreamland@gmail.com or find me on Facebook at Somewhere in Dreamland Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please help us grow by subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing this episode with friends, family, and social media. Tonight, my guest is Tobias Wayland from the Singular Fortean Society. Tobias is an author, paranormal journalist, and Fortean researcher who has focused much of his recent efforts on the new era of Mothman sightings across the United States, including the rash of sightings in the Lake Michigan region. So without further ado, grab your blankets, turn down the lights, get comfy, and let's fade away into
Dreamland.
So, Tobias Wayland, how are you tonight?
Great, thanks.
Good, man. I'm glad to have you on. You had high recommendations from Chad Lewis, and now I got you on, and I can pick your brain like I did his.
Well, honestly, that means a lot. Especially coming from somebody whose work is as impressive as Chad. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, absolutely, man, absolutely. So let's start at the very beginning. How in the heck did you get into this crazy field, man?
Oh, wow. It goes back to my childhood, honestly. When I was a little kid, I began experiencing at a very young age, like some of my oldest memories are of this. I started experiencing a series of unexplained events, really, nighttime visitations, witnessing shadow people, all manner of just unusual experiences, to the point where really I was terrified just to go to bed at night. Which I guess in and of itself isn't necessarily unusual for some kids, but it was different for me. I think because I was so terrified that all the way through grade school, obviously, I did some of the pulling the blankets up over my head and stuff like that, and that didn't really do anything for me in terms of helping with my experiences or making them end. But I would literally sneak out of bed at night, and this is kind of funny, I guess. I would follow around our dog because it made me feel safe. And so she would sleep on the floor, right? And just, picture me in first grade, sneaking out of bed because I knew if I didn't, there was a chance that something I couldn't explain was going to come for me. And it was terrifying, and I hated it. And so I would get up and I would follow her around at night, and she would fall asleep on the floor, and I would just sleep next to her. And
it's awesome.
Yeah, right. I mean, and to this day, I still love dogs. I'll always have a dog for the rest of my life. But I kept having those experiences, still do, really. And there was a certain point in my 20s where I was really trying to decide what I wanted to do. Well, I guess let me back up. I mean, when I was a little kid, obviously I was terrified by these experiences, and this is pre-internet. I really didn't have anybody I could turn to. I mean, I come from a good family, but they didn't really understand. And they weren't really there for me in terms of me being able to sort of process these experiences with them, because they were just kind of blown off. And so really my only recourse was to, go down to the library. I would ride my bike to the library every chance I got. And, I found books by guys like John Keel and Brad Steiger and Whitley Strieber, Lauren Coleman, all of these guys. And they made me feel not so alone. I would read these experiences that were so similar to what had been happening to me, and it really helped. And so when I then fast forward to me in my 20s, and I'm trying to decide what I want to do, and I was like, why don't I do something to try to give back, to do for other people what these authors had done for me, and so I started volunteering as a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. And so that was in my later 20s. And I did that for, a few years anyway. And, it was interesting, but it didn't really encompass everything I wanted to do. It didn't cover all of my interests. I felt sort of constrained by their ideology. It wasn't for me. And so I set out on my own and investigated by myself for a while before I met my wife, Emily. And it just so happened that we really had complementary skill sets. I'm a writer and she is a graphic designer and photographer. And so we were like, well, why don't we do something together? And that's how we came up with the Singular Fortean Society, where, I do most of the writing. Of course, the entire aesthetic is hers. She does all the design, photography. She also, is an investigator. So, she's always there when we are, going on site for investigations and things. And she's invaluable in terms of evaluating photographic evidence and things of that nature, which has really worked out very well, even in this, Lake Michigan Mothman investigation, frankly. And so, that's, I guess, to put it as succinctly as possible, sort of how I got into the Singular Fortean Society and sort of doing what we do today.
Awesome, man. So it sounds like you guys were really, really made for each other. It's pretty cool, man.
Oh, it's wild. Yeah. I mean, I obviously when we met, we had no idea, and it wouldn't necessarily have mattered. I would love her no matter what, but yeah, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better coincidence in terms of, being able to sort of live this particular dream.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. It's awesome. And I want to add kudos on the website, because it is top notch. It's awesome, man.
Oh, thank you. I mean, again, it's all Emily as far as the aesthetic. I like to tell people that if it wasn't for her, I would literally be some madman ranting in a dark corner of the internet in green text on a black background. Thanks to her, yeah. I mean, my writing is attractive to people because they go to this website and they're like, oh wow, look at this nice professional website that looks really cool and it has this neat aesthetic, and that is all Emily.
Is she standing behind you with a hammer right now?
Right. You just hear a hammer talk off screen here somewhere in the background.
Man. So I want to. When you say you had visitations when you were a kid, what, ghostly visitations? Any outer otherworldly?
I don't know. But it's difficult to really categorize these events, and sort of my research and investigation has reinforced that position for me, where I've talked to everybody from alien abductees to Bigfoot witnesses to people living in haunted houses, and there's so many commonalities that I sort of resist categorizing them because frankly, they could have fallen into any of those categories, or at least, so far as the phenomena related to hauntings or alien abduction. I can give you an example. Some of my earliest memories are of, being in bed, and I would be awake, like fully awake. And, I'd have the covers pulled up over my head because I was afraid, and I would feel something like digging into my ribs. It felt like hands. And I don't remember being able to see them. And it felt like, if somebody was kind of going underneath you to scoop you up, right? Yeah. And they're digging painfully into my sides, or, hands like slapping the outside of the like blankets and things like that. I remember waking up to see the heads, like faces, hovering over my bed, and those at that time did look like what you would describe as in alien gray. There was a time in my 20s, sort of in my very early 20s, and I was living at home. I had just moved back home briefly to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and I remember waking up one night, and we lived out in the suburbs, and so there was some ambient light coming in through the window, so I could see my bedroom. Looking around after waking up, I could see everything, and everything was where it was supposed to be, but it looked slightly off, and it took me a second, but I realized the reason that everything looked strange was because I was floating like several feet above my bed, and I look over to my left, and there is this dark humanoid figure. I couldn't make out any details. It just looked like a solid black figure, but it was 3-dimensional. Like, it wasn't 2D like a shadow or anything. And I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't supposed to be awake. So I'm looking around, and I could move. I wasn't paralyzed or anything. But in that moment, I kind of decided that it probably wasn't a great idea for me to move, considering my circumstances. And so I turned my head to the left, and I see this thing, and it reaches its hand out, and in my mind, I interpreted this as it trying to comfort me, because again, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be awake, and so it reaches its hand out, like puts it on my chest, and I'm lowered back down to my bed, and then it just vanishes. And it's weird because like that experience specifically, sure, some of the memories of seeing, like gray alien faces and stuff. Like, obviously people are going to interpret that as being involved with like the alien abduction phenomenon. But, you think about that, levitation experience and that shadowy figure, whatever it was, it didn't look like an unusual silhouette. Even it looked like a humanoid. Could have been the silhouette of a person, a human being under different circumstances. But like that experience by itself, some people would look at that and interpret it as an aspect of a haunting or something similar. But of course, other people will look at it and attribute that to alien abduction or at least visitation, so it's difficult to categorize. I mean, there have been weird psychic experiences in there, hearing voices, weird visions, things like that. And like I said, it's just tough to kind of put it all in one box.
Right on. I get it. Hey, I'm right there with you. Look, I'm going to out myself right now. I haven't done this yet on the show, but you said the levitation thing and it kind of got me. So yeah, the reason for my podcast is to put pieces of the puzzle together for myself and for lots of other people. Like every piece of every puzzle, I want to be at least one of those pieces. So I was talking with Mike Allens, and I was telling him, he's an alien abductee and has been since he was a kid. And he was telling me, we talked after the show, and I was telling him, some of the funny things that happened, because I've always kind of been connected and interested in this stuff, but also kind of I guess I could feel things like presences, I guess, but I've never really, I wouldn't call myself a psychic. But as a kid, I told him I remember being able to float, being able to levitate. If I concentrated hard enough, I could levitate. And all the way to the ceiling. And I got stuck on the ceiling one time and it freaked me out, and I never tried it again. But I remember doing this more times than once, And so he started asking me questions, and it really kind of freaked me out at first, But it's always cool when I hear somebody else say the levitation thing, it's really neat. So.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things too, where it's just associated with, so many seemingly disparate phenomena, right? Like if you just think of levitation sort of in terms of, a trope in and of itself, like you'll hear people talk about levitation associated with alien abduction, obviously, people sort of being levitated out of their beds and stuff, or even like out of a vehicle or whatever into a craft. But you'll also hear about people experiencing hauntings, who will talk about levitation, or levitation as a part of possession, for instance, And so it's one of those things, and there's so many of these things like this, where you just see it time and time again across all of these different phenomena, which it really to me speaks to some maybe not common source, but certainly some commonality where, there's just some fundamental aspect of these things that they all have in common. And if we could just figure out exactly, what that is, I think we would be a lot further along to understanding any of this.
I agree. And I think that all these phenomena are connected in one way or another anyway. And I like, it kind of upsets me when someone says they're a paranormal investigator, but like they don't believe in Bigfoot, or they don't believe in this, or they don't believe in that. But I just don't see how. I mean, it's okay not to believe in it and be an investigator, but when you don't do research on it because you don't believe in it, doesn't make sense to me. I think all those aspects should come together, and we should all study all these things together.
Oh, definitely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's okay, if you've examined the evidence, to not believe in something specific. Somebody could come to me with a specific investigation and present me with the evidence. And if I looked at it and went, like, hey, that's cool, but this evidence isn't very strong, then I think that is like, that's defensible, like that's not being closed-minded. But if I were just to be like, hey, I have already decided that this phenomenon doesn't exist, so I'm not even going to like look into it. I mean, how lazy is that? I mean, it's just a useless position to take, honestly. Like, it's not doing anybody any good. So yeah, no, I completely agree. And the more that I investigate this stuff, the more of these similarities that I see. Like I just finished writing my next book, and one of the major themes is all of these phenomena with all of the commonalities, between them, and there are so many. Like for instance, there were a couple of like narrative themes that I picked up on pretty quickly, and it's sort of across the field. Like it really runs the gamut of about any field of paranormal research, including like ufology, cryptozoology, parapsychology, all of that. Anytime you're really dealing with what appears to be any otherworldly intelligence, from Bigfoot to aliens to fairies, whatever, is so often what people will report is this observation. You know what I mean? Like, I can give you an example. You know, I can't tell you how many times I have spoken to witnesses, and they will talk about, you know, waking up to see something watching, you know, or they'll look over and notice something watching them. Like I spoke to a woman in North Carolina who told me about seeing this weird bird-like entity peeking around her door frame. And sometime later, when she's out driving, she was attacked in her car by this weird winged humanoid being. You know, I spoke to this woman up in Minnesota not too long ago, and she told me about seeing a shadow person in her house, and then coming to find out from, you know, testimony from her grandson and his cousin, I believe, that whatever this thing was, it appeared to be watching him while he slept. You know, I spoke to another woman who woke up one night to see this charcoal colored cloud with this weird amber light inside of it that seemed to just be hovering in the corner of her room, watching her, for lack of a better term. And this pops up again and again and again across every type of weird entity. And it's just bizarre, you know. And there are some other things, like, for instance, the other big theme that I noticed was interruption, you know. So most people aren't looking to have these kinds of experiences, right? And so, you know, most often when people have them, they're being interrupted doing something else. I mean, maybe it's, you know, sleeping sometimes, but it's just as often running an errand, you know, going for a walk, you know, talking on the telephone. That was that lady up in Minnesota. She was on the phone when she saw this shadow person. I had a guy down in Woodstock, Illinois, who had literally just ran out for some milk. Like, he went down to Walgreens, of all places. This is a totally normal errand. And on his way home, he saw what he described as this tall, hairy humanoid with leathery bat wings, you know. And it's just so bizarre to me to see these sort of like similar circumstances time and time again, regardless of the actual phenomenon being represented. You know, it's across the board. It's just so strange.
Yeah, it is strange, and that's what makes it fun, right?
Oh, sure, totally. I mean, I love how bizarre it all is. I mean, it definitely keeps things interesting. You know, somebody asked me recently if I had ever experienced anything since we started doing this that was, you know, too frightening, too disturbing, just too incredible for me to want to continue. And, you know, I've never felt that way. And I think it's partially because of how I grew up and the experiences I had, where, you know, by the time I was in my late teens, you know, I wouldn't describe this stuff as mundane, but it had lost its ability to terrify. I'm still startled, you know, because that's an involuntary response. You can't do anything about being startled, but, you know, I was done being afraid by then. But I think even more than that, there's just this fascination, this sense of wonder, this curiosity of wanting to know. And I really, really believe if I was going to be hurt, I mean, honestly, if really any of us were going to be hurt who are out there doing this, you know, we'd be hurt by now, honestly. So, you know, there doesn't really seem to be anything to be afraid of, you know, in terms of physical danger. You know, certainly there are other repercussions. You know, I think there's a level of psychological trauma that people often experience. boy, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not super qualified to speak on that. But yeah, in terms of physical danger and that, I don't really, I've never really seen much.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, it makes perfect sense. I'm a big scaredy cat, but after hearing you say that, I mean, it kind of makes me go, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't be so scared.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I'm not, and whenever I try to describe that to people, like I want to, make sure that I emphasize, I'm not some big tough guy. I'm just saying, I get startled, for instance, we were out in the Kettle Moraine State Forest with our friend Jay Pachochin. He's a Fortean investigator here with us in southeastern Wisconsin. And we had set up some camping chairs on the trail there. And, we were just, this is another one of those like moments of interruption too, by the way, which always seems to be how it works on any investigation. But anyway, so we're sitting in the middle of this trail in these camping chairs. And, we were just kind of taking it easy and chatting. And I hear behind me this loud sort of sigh, sort of like a very deep, like, and I mean, it scared the crap out of me. Like I of course instantly like had goose flesh and my hair was standing up, and I kind of turned around and I see this big shadow like moving as soon as I turn my head, and then it's gone. And, I thought at first, I was like, well, after I calmed down, it took a few seconds, obviously, but like, I thought, well, could that have been a deer? But I mean, it was totally silent. Like I've heard deer plenty of times, because there's a lot of deer around here, and we'll see them when we go out and do night hikes and stuff for sure. By the time they're moving, like obviously they're not going to make a lot of noise when they're just standing there. And that's what they'll do often. But by the time they're moving, like they make a bunch of noise. And this thing was completely silent. So I don't know what it was, but it definitely startled me. And, and I think that's sort of in terms of being scared, I think that's what people should really be prepared for, because that's going to happen. And there's really no way around it. Like I said, I mean, it's an involuntary nervous response. Like there's just nothing you can do.
Yeah, man. I mean, it is weird that the interruption there, when you're not expecting it, that when you're not looking for it, there it is,
Yeah, and I've given that a lot of thought. And, one of the things that I think those experiences have in common, like for instance, if you think about how common it is for people to experience altered states of consciousness just in their day-to-day life. And I know people hear that phrase and, like they picture, like going on some like ayahuasca trip or something. But like we experience, right. But like we experience altered states of consciousness all day, every day. I mean, going to sleep and dreaming is an altered state of consciousness. But, even more than that, what people don't realize, something like highway hypnosis, so
yeah,
anytime you have driven somewhere, and this happens to all of us, some of us, it happens to every single day. If you have a commute, if you've driven somewhere and you don't remember driving a portion of that was an altered state of consciousness that you experienced. And I think what you see is during these relatively common altered states of consciousness is when people are likeliest to experience these phenomena. And so, using sitting on the trail as an example there, I was distracted, and, it was late at night. And so while I'm not paying attention is when this decided to interact with me. And I think, again, more often than not, that's what you see. And I don't know why exactly that is. Just to speculate, I would guess it's something like, certain states of consciousness or attention are more conducive to experiencing this stuff, and so maybe it's easier for whatever this is to interact with us, in those moments, and so that's why it chooses to so often. Some of it seems accidental, honestly, like those experiences where somebody is just sort of out and about, like that guy in Woodstock. I don't know that what he saw was necessarily trying to be trying to be seen, rather. Good God. But it's difficult to say, because on the one hand, it certainly seems accidental, right? Like this thing just blundered out in front of him, didn't really seem to know what it was doing. Why would it possibly do that? But on the other hand, you're talking about this thing that had wings that was choosing to walk for some reason. And it really did come out right in front of this guy, didn't have to. And so, you have to wonder if there was some purpose behind that, right?
Right.
It's just so difficult to say. I mean, there are other experiences, I think, that, for instance, like me waking up levitating, right? I mean, that felt accidental, and the being's response seemed as though it was responding to something that it wasn't expecting, or that wasn't supposed to happen. So there may be some element of that, but of course that doesn't really disallow the idea that certain states of consciousness just make it easier to experience this stuff, which is I think a big part of what's going on. Right.
Well, let me throw this at you. I was talking with Eric Sims the other night, or Eric Freeman, I'm sorry. And we were talking about different things working on different vibrations and different levels of, say, like dimensions, okay? Like different beings in this dimension or other dimensions work on different vibration levels. Maybe when you're in that altered state of consciousness, even just driving down the highway, you're able to focus better on those different vibration levels, which enables you to see, hear, or sense these things.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I've given some thought. I mean, if, for instance, if you think of consciousness as sort of a universal force that exists outside of us, right? And the human mind is a sort of radio antenna picking up this frequency of consciousness, right? And then if you think about what it would be like for something to only exist as consciousness, right? And how we would have to interact with it, and what that would and what that would look like, then I think that this starts to make a lot more sense in a lot of ways, So if something has to interact with us, at least on some level, or even just strongly prefers to interact with us for whatever reason, using consciousness as a medium, then definitely, And I think, talking about sort of multi-dimensional beings, or beings that exist in dimensions that we aren't necessarily privy to, I mean, what if consciousness itself, so if you think of it as a sort of external force, right? I mean, what if consciousness itself exists in all of these other dimensions, but us being in these physical bodies with these meat brains, are really only capable of experiencing it, or at least filtering, like the parts of consciousness that we're able to filter and understand in this physical form, is what like we generally experience around us. And then in these altered states, we're able to pick up on some of the stuff happening in other dimensions. I know it's wild, but it makes a lot of sense when you start to really try to understand these accounts, because they don't always make a lot of sense. And so I think you find yourself going in all kinds of directions to try to explain it.
Yeah, agreed, man. And I think that if it did make sense, I don't think we'd be sitting here having this conversation, because it'd just be like everything else, right? So, how did you get started on Mothman?
Sure. I mean, I grew up reading John Keel, and so, I had read his book, The Mothman Prophecies, for the first time when I was in high school. And, at the time, like, it was an interesting story, but I was reading a lot of different weird books, and even though it was really entertaining, like, it wasn't really my favorite book. It wasn't even my favorite book by John Keel. And so, I had read it a couple of times and just kind of set it aside and didn't go back to it. And then in the spring of 2017, by that time I was writing news articles for the Singular Fortean Society, and I saw this trio of flying creature sightings in Chicago come through the Mutual UFO Network case management system. And so MUFON had written this short article on them, didn't have a lot of information. They kind of related it to the Point Pleasant sightings from mid-60s. And I thought, well, you know what? Why don't I just write this up as an article for the Singular Fortean Society? I can sort of expound on the potential Mothman connection, or just tell people a little bit more about Point Pleasant than maybe the MUFON article had. And I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I thought, okay, this will be a cool article. People will think it's interesting, and then we'll probably never hear anything about it again, and that'll be the end of it. But of course, that isn't what happened. As soon as that was published, I started seeing more sighting reports, and they were coming through Lon Strickler over at Phantoms and Monsters and Manuel Navarrete at UFO Clearinghouse. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to be a good paranormal journalist, I need to reach out to these guys and kind of see what's going on. And so I was able to contact them both independently for interviews, and I interviewed them in June and July of 2017. And I found them both to be perfectly forthright in terms of the investigation that they were conducting to that point. And I was impressed that neither one of them really seemed to have an agenda that they were pushing. Often in this field, people will have their pet theories and they try to fit everything into that box, right? But I didn't really see that happening with them. And so that was really interesting to me. And it wasn't too long after that, because, at the time, Emily and I just lived up in Madison, Wisconsin, which is maybe 2.5 hours from where most of the sightings, like in and around Chicago, were taking place. And so, it was decided that hey, why don't you guys join this investigation? Because we were local and it was interesting. And we had some mutual friends and everything. We were like, okay, well, sure, of course. And it wasn't too long, really, then that we started getting our own reports. People would reach out to us directly, which makes sense. If they read an article on our website, they would contact us. And then we were really in it, And I'll tell you, I really resisted referring to these Lake Michigan sightings as the Lake Michigan Mothman for a long time. It had to be at least a year. I would continue to use this clunky phrasing. I would just call it like a winged humanoid or a flying humanoid or, something similar, because I didn't want to sensationalize it. I was like, I just want to have the facts as we understand them and get people's testimony out as accurately as possible, and not, put any spin or bias on this. But at a certain point, it was just too similar. and I felt like the best way to contextualize these sightings for people was to relate it to the thing that it had the most in common with, and that was the Point Pleasant, West Virginia Mothman sightings. And so from that point on, I started referring to it as the Lake Michigan Mothman, and that, of course, led to the book, the Lake Michigan Mothman High Strangeness in the Midwest. But yeah, if it wasn't for these sightings, I think that I would have had the same interest in Mothman that I had before, which was, curiosity, but it wasn't really my main focus by any means.
Right. Yeah, I know the original Mothman story was to me, reading the book, and I read it as an adult. I didn't read when I was a kid. My parents were librarians. I didn't read. But I found it interesting because it's so in depth. Like there's so many things going on with it, as far as the Men in Black, the UFO sightings, and all of that. Like it's more than just like the movie, for instance, said it was, and that's what really got my attention with it. How many differences are there between the Lake Michigan Mothman and the Point Pleasant sightings? What's the difference between those two?
Sure. Well, honestly, first and foremost, like the difference is in the narration. And I can explain what I mean by that. So John Keel was a very entertaining storyteller. He was an excellent, writer, and he knew how to get people's attention and keep it. But he also never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And so when you look at the Mothman prophecies, for instance, like you can see the narrative elements that were contrived by him to make the story more interesting. Like, for instance, you look at the culmination of those sightings, at least according to him, as the collapse of the Silver Bridge, right, in December of '67. And there really isn't any evidence to connect that event to those sightings. And people need to understand, at the time, nobody thought that. Nobody was connecting to those events. And it wasn't until the book came out, which was several years later, that people started talking about it, because John Keel put it in his book. And so right there was something that I really wanted to avoid in this investigation, because again, in the Mothman prophecies, you've got a lot of conjecture based on, people channeling messages and things like that. And it's all sort of ephemeral in a way that doesn't lend itself well to credibility. And again, you combine that with John Keel's sort of fun uncle approach to storytelling, and it doesn't really authentically portray people's experiences in a lot of ways. And so that right off the bat was something that I wanted to avoid. But then, really getting down to the brass tacks of it in terms of the phenomena reported, I think the biggest differences, or really probably the most noticeable for me immediately, was there weren't any, Men in Black or anything, or, still aren't. These sightings are ongoing. They didn't stop or anything. Nobody ever reported any Men in Black or anything. But, at the same time, when was the last time anybody did anywhere? That seems like a phenomenon that sort of petered out like a few decades ago. You don't really hear anything about them anymore. And it's difficult to know what to do with that, but it's true. You never hear about Men in Black, so I don't know why you would expect to see any or have any as part of this. But that was that was the big one. Again, like I never really I guess looked for channeled messages or anything. I would definitely be open to them, but like I didn't really come across any as a part of this investigation. So that wasn't something that featured heavily in the narrative of our particular investigation. But like that, I think those two things sort of are the things that stick out to me as far as differences, because everything else is fairly similar in terms of the phenomena. So you've got people reporting these weird winged humanoids. They're often terrified, and they describe these mesmerizing eyes that are often glowing red, and they're terrorized by this thing. But in these same areas, you've got UFOs reported and other strange humanoids and flying creatures and everything else. And so like that part of it is very much the same. And if you really go back and look at what people were talking about, in the Ohio River Valley at that time, and ongoing, really, I'm sure like it never really stopped there either.
Right.
It is very similar in terms of what real people are really describing as far as their experiences, and not something filtered through the lens of entertainment.
What about conjunctivitis? Any of that like there was in the original case?
That I knew I was forgetting something. Yeah, that was another one where I haven't seen any really reported in these sightings. But I investigated UFOs. Like I started with UFOs in this field. And that's another thing where you heard about those all the time in like the 70s, right? People reporting UFO sightings, and they would have these like red, irritated eyes for like days afterwards. And by the time it would have been sometime in the aughts, probably, when I started with MUFON, I never heard about that, ever. It was not a thing that anybody ever came to me with. And so it's difficult to explain, but no, I didn't see any of it in this investigation, but I've also never really seen any of it ever. I've never had a witness talk to me about, witnessing a UFO or any kind of humanoid. And I think he'll even mentions, that he came across this first when investigating UFOs, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I've never come across it in the, oh boy, how old am I? 14 years I've been doing this now. Has never come up.
I wonder if, there's a lot to think about there too. Just in that conjunctivitis thing, that could be a whole other almost investigation in its own. Like, why is that happening? Why is it not happening now when it was then? Is it because there was just a rash of pink eye going around, or is it because the technology changed for whoever was visiting us or whatever it was?
That's a really good question, honestly, and I agree that it would be a very interesting line of inquiry to follow, for sure. The thing I think I would look at is, okay, is this something that people are describing across the board, or is this something that's only being described to certain investigators? Because if you look at it and it's like just John Keel and like Gray Barker and a couple of their other friends who are talking about this, then that seems weird. But if it's something you've got multiple unrelated sources talking about people ending up with these sunburned eyes, basically from watching UFOs, then suddenly that gets way more interesting. And so I think that's where I would begin there. And then if it turns out that, yeah, like there are multiple reports of this, which just off the top of my head, I believe that there are. I'm not trying to accuse Keel or Marker or anybody of making this up by any means, because I guess if you think about like the Cash Landrum encounter, for instance, I believe one of the symptoms described was that conjunctivitis, and of course that had nothing to do with any of those investigators. So I suppose that right there would be independent verification. But anyway, so once you've got that, then yeah, you have to start asking yourself, well, okay, what is that about, and why aren't we seeing it now? And then I guess I don't know where to go with it from there, because if you think about the events that people are experiencing and how they describe them in terms of UFO encounters, are they really so different today than they were 40, 50 years ago? I guess I don't know that they are. I would say that just from my own anecdotal experience, investigating, UFOs, speaking to witnesses, I don't see many, if really any, of the kinds of real close encounter cases, in terms of being very close to the craft, that I think we used to see, more famously back then. And so maybe it's a proximity thing, and people aren't getting as close. Whatever's behind it is sort of keeping people at arm's length, in terms of not letting them get very close to the craft or whatever they are anymore. Maybe that's it, but yeah, it's weird. It's definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, for sure. So has there been any like cattle mutilations, any kind of animal mutilations, animals missing, anything like that around these areas?
Well, it's a huge area, and so certainly animals have gone missing. Now, I haven't had anybody report specifically hey, I saw this thing and then an animal went missing or something, but I'm sure between now and spring of 2017, some dogs and cats and things have gone missing out of the greater Chicago metropolitan area. But as far as someone reporting to me that they had found a strangely mutilated animal, I haven't seen that. The only cattle mutilation I'm familiar with is nowhere near here. I had somebody who had reported some cattle mutilation down in Florida. And then, of course, there's this stuff that's been going on in Oregon over the past couple of years. But right around these sighting areas, I haven't really seen anything to indicate that that's happening. Now, trying to remember with the Point Pleasant sightings, I believe there was one dog that was found dead, right?
It was the old man's dog, right? He had the weird thing go on with his TV, and then his dog went missing. And did anybody ever investigate the death of that dog, like how the dog died? I mean, did it just get hit by a car, or you know what I mean? Did anybody look at that?
Well, that's a great question. And as far as I know, nobody did. I mean, if Keel did, he didn't tell anybody. But again, that's one of those things where if it makes for a better story to have the dog, to leave it open for the dog having been killed as a part of these phenomena, then I guess we just do that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. People always like to have that that beginning, that drama, and then they have to have a clear and concise ending to their story, like always.
Yeah, there's nothing people love more than a tidy narrative, and Keel knew that, of course he did. And so, yeah, he wrote this really entertaining book that was made into a major Hollywood motion picture, a couple decades later. And it's because it's a really good story. It's a fun narrative. And yeah, you're right. And it's because it has all of the elements that you need for an entertaining narrative. Like people want a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in reality, most of the time, these investigations, they don't have that, like there's no end to this. Like nothing ever stopped. I don't expect anything to stop. Not completely, but it's not as good of a narrative, unfortunately.
The one thing that you don't hear a lot of people talk about is the fact that these things aren't just happening here. Like these Mothman type sightings, they're kind of been seen all over the world. And I don't feel like that gets played out that much.
Yeah, you don't hear very, very much about it, but I've never received personally, anything, in terms of like a credible winged humanoid report from outside of the U.S. But I don't get a lot of reports from outside of the U.S. So, there would have to be local investigators or something in these other areas looking into it to really determine if they're credible or not. Now I know some of that stuff was straight up just invented for the Mothman Prophecies movie. So if you look at and this is in an online urban legend to this day, you look at like the Blackbird of Chernobyl, right? Well, that was invented by the screenwriter for the Mothman Prophecies movie. They talk about it in the movie, because there's that scene where I forget what they made. They changed Keel's name to something else. Richard Gere's character. Yeah. And he's talking to that professor, and the dude he's telling him about all these other disasters that this entity was seen at, and he talks about Chernobyl and the Galveston, Texas hurricane and all this other stuff. And nobody ever reported any of that stuff around those disasters. It never happened.
Oh wow, they got me. See, got me.
Yeah, right. I mean, no, it's insidious. So I mean, that's the big one right there. Like nobody ever, for whatever reason, like Galveston, Texas, never took off in terms of like people using that bit of fiction from the movie. But yeah, Chernobyl, like that really hung in there. But there's never really been any firsthand accounts or anything. It's just been like this online urban legend where you see people who will say things like, oh, and did you know just before Chernobyl happened, people were reporting like this huge black bird or this weird winged creature. And it's like, which people? Who? We don't know because they don't exist.
I also heard that about the Minnesota bridge collapse not too long that happened. What was that, a few years ago? Was that a true statement too, or was that a true story too?
I put it in the same category as those others. I don't think there's much to it. When it comes to that specifically, I haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe that there is a credible connection, or even that anything weird was seen there, period. Now, it was after that bridge collapsed, I think, that you started hearing rumors of a winged humanoid, which is suspect, as far as I'm concerned. Because, of course, a bridge collapsed. So now all of a sudden people are going to say, oh, hey, did you hear about the winged humanoid people saw just before that bridge collapsed? after it collapsed. So, yeah, it doesn't seem particularly credible to me. I mean, I would love for there to be an eyewitness or something to come forward and be like, no, I saw it, I swear. And I would find that really, really interesting, and I would be open to that. But it hasn't happened as far as I am aware.
Awesome. So with these reports of the Lake Michigan Mothman, people were reporting like this sense of fear even before they see this thing. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think it has to do with, with what we were talking about before, so you've got consciousness as a sort of medium, and I think it's being manipulated. And I think part of that manipulation is emotion, right? So, like for instance, you've got there was a guy, and this was related to me by his daughter, a few decades later, but she was there, or at least she was at home when he got home from this experience, and she saw the damage to his car and everything. But anyway, so he was out. This would have been in Waukegan, which is north of Chicago, back in sometime in the 70s. I don't have my timeline in front of me, but he had gone out to help his friend whose car battery had died. And so he was going to go jumpstart his car, and it was in this deserted parking lot with some nearby silos. And they're out there, and he's starting to get the jumper cables hooked up. And just out of nowhere, seemingly, he just is overcome with fear. Like he's just suddenly terrorized. And so he starts looking around, and he sees on top of one of these buildings, these silos, this thing, this winged thing. And he said it had these red eyes, and he wasn't going to stick around to see what it was, right? And so they don't bother jump starting his friend's car. He gets the jumper cables, his friend jumps in his car, and they take off. And he said on the way out that whatever this thing was swooped down, and it attacked their car, and it clawed it up, scratched the car up. And so when he got home, he told his family about it. It was his daughter that related his experience to me, because he had since passed away. But she said that she remembered seeing these scratches on the car. And on the surface, that seems violent, right? Yeah. But again, if this thing really wanted to hurt him, if its intention was to cause physical harm to these guys, well, it had the drop on them. It could have just swooped down out of the night and clawed them up if it wanted to, right? But it didn't. Instead, it made them afraid, and then when they ran, it scared them a little bit more just to make sure. And that was it. That was the end of it. And so, I think, again, that the fear is caused through this manipulation of consciousness, and whatever mechanism is used for that. And then in many cases, it seems like the fear itself is kind of the point. For whatever reason, in certain circumstances, whatever this thing is, or these things are, they want people to be afraid. And, maybe it's just scaring people away from a certain area. Maybe it's some sort of weird sociological experiment. Maybe they really get off on scaring people or feed off of that particular emotional energy or something. I don't know. But it certainly seems as though sometimes that fear is the whole point.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, that's crazy. Maybe it is feeding off of it. Maybe it makes it. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, and my guess is as good as yours. Really,
absolutely.
So what's next for you, man? I know you said you had a new book coming up.
Yeah. So we've got our next book coming out, Strange Tales of the Impossible. and that's going to be out next month. We're looking at a July release date for that. Our plan is to get it out in time for Haunted America, which is an excellent conference. Anybody anywhere near Southern Illinois absolutely needs to go to Haunted America. Unfortunately, it is sold out this year. It's a really popular conference. So if you have any interest in going, I would look into tickets for next year as soon as possible. But we want to get the book out by then, and then I'll be speaking at Haunted America July 24th. So if you already got your tickets, I hope to see you there, and I hope you'll sit through my entire presentation, and then come hang out with Emily and I in the vendor hall. And then we were just down in the Chicago area filming on the trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman with Small Town Monsters. So that was a lot of fun, and I think that was really interesting. It's always great to see all those guys. Seth Breedlove obviously was a part of that, and Heather Mosier, who was fantastically knowledgeable about all things folklore. They were down there, and we got to hang out with them. And of course, the crew is all great, and so that was a lot of fun. And that should be out, I want to say, the end of this year. I don't remember if it's November or December. But yeah, towards the end of 2021, people should be able to see that. So that'll be exciting. And yeah, otherwise, we've got one other conference scheduled this year, which is the Beast of Bray Road Conference. And that's near Elkhorn. And I believe that is October 2nd. So that one is not sold out. So if anybody wants to make some long-term plans for a cool, weird conference later this year, definitely come see us there. And if you follow us on social media, we'll of course be posting about all that stuff to remind everybody to hopefully come out.
Awesome. Hey, I was going to ask you, when was the last report that you got?
The most recent one that I got was, I had a weird flying something report out of downtown Chicago not too long ago. But the last, what I would consider winged humanoid report that I received was just at the end of last year. There were two young women in Oregon, Wisconsin, who were out driving around. It was Thanksgiving night, actually, and they saw what they described as this bulky humanoid, this bulky winged humanoid, basically. And so that was the last one that we received. Interestingly enough about that, actually. So these two young women, they were kind of doing what, people do when you live in a small town in Wisconsin when you're a teenager. There's nothing to do. So you drive around. And so they were just driving around out in the country. They had this loop that they would take and whatever. And so they were approaching this one sort of lonely intersection. It's got this lone street light on it. And there are a couple houses around, but it's out in the country, so they're not real close together or anything. And it's relatively isolated. And so they're approaching this intersection, and there's a possum in the road. So they stop, and when they do, they see this winged humanoid kind of swoop down over the street light in front of them. And they couldn't believe their eyes, of course. And they're like, wow, what the hell was that? And they decide, after they freaked out for a minute, that they were just going to keep driving and talk about it. And then they just continued on their loop and ended up coming back and came back a few times. And they reported all of this other weird sort of phenomena happening around that sighting, and then one other subsequent sighting that night. And so they talked about seeing a weird amount of deer all headed in the same direction, sort of away from where they saw this thing. And they talked about how every time they passed that intersection, their radio would glitch. It would get real staticky, and it would start playing a different station, all the way at the other end of the dial. And it was all very bizarre. And so, Emily and I decided, after I had interviewed these young women over the phone, that, we were going to go out there. It was only 15, 20 minutes away from us. And we had all of our cameras and recording equipment and stuff. And I turned the radio on. I wouldn't normally do that on an investigation, but I figured, what the hell? Like, let's see if it freaks out. And it didn't, like, while we were there. But interestingly enough, you know, like we drove this route and checked out the intersection and everything. And I didn't see any Mothman or anything. But when we got home, and this, I still can't explain it, we checked our video, right? Just to see how it looked and everything. And I'll be damned if there wasn't this weird audio interference. It's like this clicking. And it starts, like there's this radius, like you can tell where it begins and ends around this intersection. And so we would drive into the radius of whatever this effect is. So like the camera's working fine, no audio interference, everything's fine. And then we cross this invisible threshold, right? And suddenly audio interference. And then we turn through this intersection and like cross the invisible line again, and it's just gone. And we turn around and we drive back through it, and it starts again. And then as soon as we're out of the bubble, it's gone. And, you know, when I saw that, I was like, well, you know, what is this? And so we went back and I looked for anything at all that could have caused this, you know, transformers, satellite dishes, ham radio towers, anything that I could think of that might somehow interfere with all of our cameras simultaneously, because it was more than one camera that was affected by whatever this was. And I have not been able to figure it out. I couldn't find anything. And so that really has stuck with me as this bit of like corroborative evidence of these young women's testimony. It's just it was a fascinating case. But yeah, I mean, that was the last one that I thought was particularly credible. And again, that was fairly recently, just the end of last year.
That's fascinating, man. You know, I think there is something to the radio interference thing with all the way across the board. I mean, there is a lot of, first of all, there has been a lot of research. Even what Thomas Edison was trying to make a ghost phone, right, or whatever it was called. And there was an Italian scientist who claimed to be able to speak to, he thought was people from, you know, that were dead through a phone or a ham radio, right? I mean, there's something to it. I don't care. There's something to it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was too weird for me to ignore. That's for sure.
I think more research needs to be done there. And I think it is. I read an article, I can't remember the company, but they claim that they've made this new machine that allows you to speak to people from other dimensions and the dead. And I can't remember the name of it because I don't remember stuff. I got punched in the head too many times when I was younger. So
gotcha. I mean, we've had some success with our spirit boxes and stuff. Certainly, you know, like we've even taken those out in the Kettle Moraine State Forest because we've experienced a good amount of high strangeness. Now that area is known for Bigfoot and Dogman sightings, but there's enough high strangeness out there where we're not going to forsake any, you know, avenues of investigation. And so, you know, we've had some interesting spirit box results from like that state forest. So I think there's something to that. I think that there are frequencies that this phenomenon or phenomena does communicate through or can be communicated with through. So I mean, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, everything is interesting in this field, man. I mean, there's so much that it could never get old. I don't think it'll ever get old. Well, hey, man, where can everybody find you online, social media, your books, your movies? Where can they report to you if they need to? Where can that be done at?
Sure. So if you want to check out the Singular Fortean Society, our website is singularfortean.com. And then you can actually find links to all of our social media on there. You know, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, just about any social media you can think of. And if you're interested in our books, of course, like there is a link on our website where you can purchase signed copies, or you can go to Amazon and purchase them there as well. If you are interested enough in what we do that you want to be a part of it, then I encourage you to check out patreon.com/Singular Fortean. And, you know, we have several tiers of Forteana for anybody interested in, you know, that you could actually participate in what we do.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll post all that in the show notes, so it'll all be right there. They'll be able to follow a link and get you out there, man.
That sounds great.
Well, hey, Tobias, I really appreciate you coming on, man, and it was a pleasure talking with you.
I appreciate you having me. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Well, that about does it for Dreamland tonight, dreamers. If you like the show, please remember to hit the subscribe button and feel free to leave us a review. Thanks again for listening, and good night.